And here we are, back for episode 2, part 2 of the Amsterdam Torture Museum. We left off with the Inquisition chair, the torture chair. And we visited a number of ideas such as the theory of the body, demonology, so on and so forth. But let's move beyond. Here we see a photograph of a torture chamber with various items, so on and so forth. This item here is really quite horrific. This is the pear. After we take a moment to examine it, let us consider the explanation of the pear. Blasphemous language constituted a serious indication of heresy. The graver the suspicion, the further the inquisitor could have this pear-shaped instrument tightened. The method of interrogation was precisely mirrored the hideousness of the vomitings of heresy. The competence of the Inquisition was restricted to crimes against religious doctrine. However, secular courts also employed the mouth pear to punish various violations. The message was to get the victim, the perpetrator, to shut up. I might add that this pear has 3 panels, and the torturer would rotate the handle, and it would open these 3 panels. There's also a spike on this end. This would be inserted into the mouth for those who were charged with blasphemy. It also had other functions as well. It was also known as the vaginal pear, to be used on women. And to punish homosexuals, it was also known as the anal pear. Contemplate that. Here we see more references to the threat of Satan manifesting in grotesque bodily form, lurking about, tempting, seducing women. Probably saying to yourself, just a couple of ordinary wheels. What's the big whoop? Well, these wheels were used for excruciating torture and excruciating slow death. Let's look at some text. When someone was sentenced to the wheel, the sentence indicated exactly how many strokes he deserved. The culprit would be riveted with outstretched hands and feet, after which the executioner would crush his limbs with the wheel, from bottom to top, as a sign of mercy, starting with a coup de grace in the back of the neck. Dying or dead, the body would then be twinned, would be, I guess, the proper word is it would be braided into the spokes of the wheel and finally erected, wheel and all. The wheel was especially reserved for those most dishonorable murderers, exclusively men. The instrument was so strongly tainted with the wickedness of the scoundrel that each executioner required a new wheel. let's go to an illustration. Now, let me explain the step-by-step procedure. The victim would be stripped of his clothes, and the executioner, hoisting this large wagon wheel, would systematically break each of the major limbs. But would not deliver a fatal blow. Once all of these limbs were broken, he would then braid the wheel, its spokes, with a limp body, limp limbs, and then be placed on a large pole. And this is where one historical account described this victim as a large, slimy puppet. Once the wheel was placed on the pole, you could actually rotate, spin the wheel with this slimy puppet of a victim. Give it a whirl. Go for a spin. Perhaps those phrases can be traced to breaking on the wheel. Building suspense. What might be in this room? And there you have it. You've got the wheel on display. Boutique lighting. Back to museum studies. The curators used boutique lighting from an angle, but also colorization to add drama to the aura of this instrument of torture. Placed in its own space. Yes, there are engravings in the backdrop and you see some rope off to the side. But for the most part, this room was designed to put on display this horrific instrument of torture. And this adds to the dramatic effect of the museum experience. Oftentimes, hangings were done in groups. We see other people being tortured in this panorama of violence. You see the ladder, the gallows. Every significant town had its gallows lee outside the gates as a deterrent sign of supreme judicial power. The rope was utterly dishonorable punishment. Not only the gallows bird, but the instrument tainted. At the construction of the new gallows, the craftsman had to take part in the tainted job, which was concluded with a lavish meal. The person to be hanged was also entitled to a last meal. A large number of judicial customs served this one purpose, exercising the evil powers of death and destruction. And today we still have amongst us in the U.S. the ritual of the last meal before execution. Here we see a lot of activity. We see this victim being prepped for execution, hanging. But let me draw something to your attention. you notice that the victim is being brought in on a cart. Now, especially in the time of the French Revolution, to be carted off was a saying that indicated that the person was going to be delivered to the guillotine, to be carted off. Because oftentimes the victim, along with 11 other recently convicted perpetrators of treason, would be loaded onto this cart and wheeled through the city of Paris, where they would be heckled, humiliated, and then townspeople would follow the cart in anticipation, knowing they would be going to the guillotine for a public execution. Carted off. What do we have next? These frames are actually detached, and they could be arranged, reassembled on the floor to prop up the victim, to prop up the body, so that the executioner, the torturer, could use his imagination to improvise how he wants to go about inflicting torture on the body. We're going to leave this episode with this image. Just imagine a body being confined to that cage.